Welcome to part 4 of the Merlin Chronicles. Before I get to reading in here, I want to make a point that I do make on a little notation here in the book, and it's really important. Merlin was born in the 4th century, according to Thoth. However, he didn't leave this mortal coil until the 6th century. And he was a Germain type being, he was able to prolong his life. The only reason he even looked older in the Merlin time, where he looked more like an older man, not really old, mind you, but older, was because he allowed himself to, at that point, he wanted to look the part. If you remember his natal chart, he was a showman, and a showman with a reason, and not just for fun. And in that period of time, in the 6th century, people respected wizened-looking men. Not the young ones, but the older ones. So he chose to appear older. However, he could have looked just as young as he was at, let's say, about 35 or something, but he chose not to. So I wanted to share that before we continue. Now, going to my notes. Merlin's grandson, Carmarthen, I always have trouble with that name, whom his father nicknamed Megan, by his daughter, Mercedes Adora, and Patricus, received his name from the place where Merlin's father went to live when he was cast out from the Isle of Man. It is also KYI'RA, a town at the far southwest of the Principality of Wales. As Gareth Knight writes in the secret tradition in Arthurian legend, quote, "It is close to Hibernian contacts and influence to this very day, and an obvious outpost of ancient colonists from the west. It is in this district of Dyfed, recently Pembrokeshire, that the blue stones of the earlier Stonehenge derive. According to Geoffrey, Merlin's mother was the daughter of the King of South Wales, who lived in a nunnery as a result of a strange encounter with a non-human entity who became Merlin's father," unquote. It is thought that Merlin was born in Carmarthen, which Thoth Merlin says he was not, having been born instead on the Isle of Man. But he does say that Merlin's mother did hail from Carmarthen and was the daughter of the King of South Wales. It is the site of a more recent ancient race coming from Atlantean shores and is a point of unification for several etheric and physical ley lines. The King of South Wales took a very dim view of his daughter's marriage to a pagan. As a result, he disowned her, which would lead one back into the demon and nun story. That Merlin's father would flee to enemy territory would seem illogical unless it be considered that there were Atlantean orders in that region which would welcome the initiated, as Hester most certainly was. It would not have been difficult for him to go into hiding there. Mary Grace's father had not lived long after her mother Mary Grace's father had not lived long after her marriage, and few knew the true story of her disappearance. While it is true that St. Patrick was a strongly Roman-influenced Christian, privately he blended his Christian beliefs with a generous portion of Celtic paganism. To outwardly demonstrate such views would in that age have been heresy. For this reason, Sukkot kept his roots of a pagan grandmother secret and was silent as to his hidden life among the grove folk and the spiritual beliefs instilled by them within his innermost being. Needless to say, another well-kept secret was his illegitimate, in the eyes of the Christian Church, son. Yet the adult Megan met with Patricus when the latter returned to Glastonbury as an older man. By then, many watchful eyes of the church were on him, but there was a moment between father and son, even if no words were spoken. Although he kept his pagan connection silent, there was much about Bishop Patricus that troubled the Roman Catholic Church. He had unorthodox ways of dealing with the heathen pagans, which they tolerated only because it seemed to bring results, conversion to Christianity. What they were blind to see was that Patricus was able to show the pagans a meeting ground between the two worlds, Christian and pagan. This was as Merlin sought to incorporate when he brought Arthur to the throne. There is said to be a great stone chair on the rock of Cashel, that was among the relics of St. Patrick. Thoth tells me this chair was a gift from Merlin and was an empowered ritual throne, much like the Siege Perilous, divined by Merlin. Patricus's chair was not quite a Siege Perilous, but it had its magical properties. And I might also wish to address just momentarily, I think I said Merlin died just a minute or two ago when I was talking about something, not reading from this book, but saying something. Of course, he didn't die in the traditional sense because his body is still in perpetuation, shall we say, just like Torhanna's and the others in this crystal cave scenario. It was placed there a little in an orthodox way, even for the lumens, but it is still there. Also, addressing Patrick again, this information that Thoth is giving here certainly would not correlate with the Patrick that was torturing and murdering, maybe not torturing, but, having all these pagans killed and all of that, which he did not do, according to Thoth. This is, just contrived fiction registered as historical fact. Okay, we go to the third note here. Thoth Merlin reveals that the burial site of Murith and his son Ban Galahad are on the Isle of Man, untouched through the centuries. Arthur and Guinevere were buried in a separate part of the isle, but their remains were later removed and reinterred at Glastonbury. This was not done by Vikings, as has been suggested, but in fear of the possibility of Vikings or other treasure seekers who in that period had begun scouring Man for the many valuable caches it harbored. Both Tor Hill at Glastonbury and Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain were ancient temples of the reindeer people. Because Merlin reactivated these sites, they were known in his time as Merlin's Watches, although he personally made no statements of claim upon them. While Merlin awakened many of the stone circles and mounds, these two were the ones he frequented most because of their power grids, the two most potent vortexes enhanced through geomancy, earth modification in Great Britain. And 5, some relevant information to assimilate with all that has been written in these chronicles are the following quotations from Gareth Knight's The Secret Tradition in Arthurian Legend. Quote, Merlin is, however, no mere illusionist. He represents a humanized Western form of the ancient gods of learning and civilization, such as the Greek Hermes or the Egyptian Thoth. Of course, both Hermes and Thoth are the same personage, also the same as the Thoth Merlin, who supplied the information for this book. He is furthermore one of those akin to, now I'm sorry, that was me stating that, that he's the same personage. Okay, now we go back to Gareth's quote, and he says, he is furthermore one of those akin to Melchizedek in the Old Testament, without father or mother, without descent. Well, the original Melchizedek, according to Thoth, was the Menusian who brought the whole Grail lineage to the planet, who was also, at least Thoth was laid with one of the souls of Melchizedek. So there you go. It's all tied in together. Now, I'm saying in the book, this should be understood from the perspective that the master initiate is always born from parents who embody the mysteries. She is then born of the mysteries, his human lineage absorbed by the plan incorporated in the mysteryhood. And so I guess we're continuing to quote here. Next, what I'm going to say next is quoting again from the Arthurian legend. These are the great superhuman figures who work behind the scenes of planetary evolution, sometimes appearing physically to selected disciples at particular times of opportunity or crisis, but for the most part unseen, working through chosen human intermediaries. They are known in Eastern esoteric literature as Manus. In this role, Merlin brought the secret teaching of doomed Atlantis at the end of its phase to the new world of Europe, and founded first the Iberian mysteries, the vestiges of which came down to us in the mythology of Ireland. Here we have Ireland and the connection to Patricus. Okay, continuing. Following this, and from other western seaboard outposts, the same teaching spread to the rest of the islands of Britain and continental Europe. Unquote. Now, I say, Thoth says as Merlin, he reconstituted the Iberian mysteries, but they were first established by him as Thothracemus, the Egyptian initiative of the Atlantean and Blue Star mystery school. Okay, we continue now with Gareth Knight's quotes. Quote, his mandate came from a great primordial being who is traditionally called Narada. Now, I'm putting in parentheses here my statement that says the Shining One who visited both Hestor and his son Myrddin, granddaughter Mercedes, great-grandson Murith, and grandson Galahad is the same being that is this Narada, the Shining One. Okay, back to Gareth Knight's quote. It was he who brought through the consciousness of humanity as a guiding light to the consciousness of humanity as a guiding light, the great solar pattern of a central life generating point surrounded by 7 circles of force. This was the pattern of the great sun temple of Atlantis on the Isle of Ruta, and the spiritual pattern of civilization upon which the Atlantean human epoch was built. This, in the early days of Atlantis, was a secret teaching confined to the sacred clan of aristocratic priest initiates. End of quote. Now, I'm saying in my book, the great solar pattern is an inner reflection of the central sonatoma within the earth, as well as being an outer reflection of the cosmic sun, and further, the central logos of the universe. The latter-day Atlantean wizards, such as Merlin, an Atlantean through spiritual adoption, based much of their mysteries on the inner earth realm and their genetic connection to the races inhabiting the central cavity of the planet. Now we go back to Gareth Knight's quotes again. At the end of the Atlantean epoch, Merlin was charged to bring the new root race, a more subtle and complex form of the plan. This new pattern was that of the round table. This added the concept of corporate responsibility through individual endeavor in place of the emphasis on hierarchy. A further advance on the previous solar pattern in that the new formula takes cognizance of forces beyond our immediate solar system. With the round table, stellar forces and patterns are taken into account, for it is indeed a form of zodiac. This teaching emanates from a cosmic center of force that is concerned with the universal evolution of consciousness, as opposed to comparatively localized solar or planetary evolution. For purposes of Earth consciousness, that source of influence may be thought of as emanating from what appear to us to be the 7 stars of the constellation of the Great Bear. Unquote. Now, I say in the book, my book, the 7 sisters of the Pleiades are the stars to which Mr. Knight is referring. Thus, according to Thoth, these, according to Thoth, are one of the 3 governing stations of living lights for our world. Years ago, long before my interest in or knowledge of Merlin and Arthurian legend, other than what a child might glean from storybooks, my benefactor, Thoth, took me on a voyage etherically into a chamber beneath the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt. There, to my amazement, within a gloriously shining room was a large round table. It contained beautiful designs, colors, and gems upon it, and it made me think of the round table in the children's books. I was puzzled at the time about this Arthurian-looking table under the pyramid in Egypt. Now I understand that the table I saw was no doubt an archetypal model of the Arthurian version. I do not believe it was the same relic, as it was far more elaborate than the one which seated the knights. In retrospect, this episode exemplifies the connectiveness among all races and cultures, having within their mysteries the same archetypal truths in inner forms. This, of course, is most especially viable when within the context of reincarnation, where souls move through various cultures. Thoth was Thoth of Racemus, the Egyptian, also contained the genetics of Venus, the blue star in Tibet, and he was also Merlin, the mixture of blue star, fairy, and Celtic. Now, I want to pause here for a moment. When I was reading this quote about the round table from Gareth Knight, I started receiving something very powerful from Thoth just now, more than I can stop and tell you about because it would take us off into another direction. But I'm going to be writing about this. But in the briefest form, it has to do with a round table now and the collection of these energies and vestiges and beings opening a solar pattern on the planet, which is part of the retrieval of our divine logos, our planetary genius, into a living font that will help accelerate us through into the pyramid's radius matrix and beyond into the new Earth-star reality. But it will do so by making corrections to much of what is going on now on the planet. And I just received this. And then from there, I start reading and I get about this vision that I had. Of course, I don't remember this at all, about the table being under the Great Pyramid. And I believe that is the table that we're going to be working with. Now, I'm not going to say any more right now because I just received all of this. It's going to be something else that we'll be talking about. But I believe it may be the next step, or soon to be the next step, after this, what we just experienced here on Good Friday, the transferring of the Grail logos from Utenberg in Austria, Mount Utenberg, to Mount Blanca here in the San Luis Valley. And you'd have to go back and listen to the video I just made on that to understand what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to go any further with that, but I'm just saying that there's a connection here. Okay, so we come back to Merlin and the notes that I've written here in the book. And the next one is both the Pleiades and Orion, constellation of the blue star Rigel, was mentioned by Merlin in his prophecies, much of which is now in the original form, having been tampered with extensively through the ages. Yet his references to these two star systems is authentic, if not entirely within its original framework of meaning. This is discussed in the book The Prophetic Vision of Merlin by R.J. Stewart. I'm going to quote from Mr. Stewart here. As we have suggested in the speculations upon Merlin's own horoscope and his connection with the lunar nodes, symbolized by a dragon, our text draws upon some very complex and ancient star lore. Now, I don't know what he's talking about his horoscope. That's interesting, because the horoscope I received is the only one I know of. But that's the end of the quote there. Mr. Stewart speculates that because of certain references by Merlin in his prophecies, Merlin was born when the dragon's head was in Gemini and the dragon's tail was in Sagittarius, unquote. I remember that the second time I saw Merlin in vision, he was wearing a dragon's belt, and I was aware of his strong association with the dragon. It is also a symbol on the crest of Galatane. It would follow suit that the Galatanes were also related through the blue star strain to Thoth of Racemus, who slew the dragon, Typhon, and Quetzalcoatl, or the feathered serpent, both incarnations of Merlin, though at least one of Merlin's 5 souls. And also Thoth was part of Quetzalcoatl as well. In the horoscope of Merlin given within this book, it has not yet come to light that there might be any physical correlation with the dragon and Merlin's birth. However, from an esoteric point of view, Merlin most definitely ushered in an age in which the head beginning of the dragon, awakening, transforming through the initiation of solar fire of the Atlantean mysteries, was a mission of balancing duality, Gemini, and the tail ending, initiation, higher mind, realization of self, Sagittarius. While on the subject of dragons, Thoth has given his definition of them as nature intellect from the original inner sun before Earth formed around it. The dragons contain, and I'm going to turn a page here, sorry folks, the codes of the fire devas and the densest star matter. They are arbiters of the most powerful nature dynamics, degenerating, transforming, creating, from the molten layers and the solar core. They are the original alchemists. And that's a quote from my Thoth. In my book, The Black Rose Translations, which I've already read to you in another series, Thoth answers my question concerning the nature of dragons. So I'm going to read it again here in the context of this book. The dragons, like unicorns, are an extensive mystery. Unlike unicorns, they are no longer able to physically manifest on the surface of the planet. However, they can be summoned into an in-between form, much like disincarnate souls can appear without actual physical substance. While all unicorns are of the light, some dragons have been reformed by evil humankinds into malevolent energies. Yet, most dragons serve the light. The actual dragon power is the primeval fire of elementation, which was the first created form in the center of the planet, within the central sunatoma. Since that time, sentient thoughts have molded them into various forms. For again, unlike the unicorns, dragons are malleable. They can be shifted and changed in form and determination by the thoughts and powers of those mortals who delve into their mysteries. Dragon power is formidable, yet in its pure state, in its imaging, yet in its pure state and its imaging through mind of pure intent, it is the divine movement of Earth's first consciousness. The dragon who guardians the black rose, unicorn, was formed into her present structure by a high priest of wizardry named Epsilon. This priest later reincarnated as one of the 5 souls of Merlin. Epsilon's dragon was redimensionalized by Merlin, and he named her Ismerald. Unquote. That's from the Black Rose Translations that I just did the video series on. Thoth Merlin went on to say that Ismerald had nurtured Merlin's children when they were young. The Merlin, who is often quoted in books as having lived as a mad hermit and died on a battlefield, is not the Merlin that is written about in the pages of the Merlin Chronicles. The slightly deranged mystic of the battlefield was a later entity who took that name as a form of magical title so that he would hopefully be seen as a spiritual brother to our Merlin of the Mound. And so this concludes part 4. I think it's part 4 of the Merlin Chronicles. Me and numbers are not exactly closely associated. So stay tuned for part 5.